The courtroom was filled with laughter. Judge Theodore Grayson leaned back in his grand leather chair, shaking his head with an amused smirk. He had just finished mocking the disheveled, barefoot man standing before him. The man's clothes were torn, his beard unkempt, and his smell, well, it made the bailiff shift uncomfortably. "You expect me to take you seriously?" Judge Grayson chuckled, raising an eyebrow. "You look like you just crawled out of a dumpster." The gallery erupted in giggles. Even the prosecutor was barely suppressing a smile. The homeless man remained calm, staring directly at the judge. Then, he slowly reached into his ragged coat pocket and pulled out a wallet. With steady hands, he slid out a card and held it up. The courtroom went silent. "My name is Alexander Cole," the man said, his voice steady. "I am a licensed attorney in this state, and I demand to be treated with the respect I deserve." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The prosecutor's jaw dropped. The bailiff took a step closer, unsure if this was a prank. Judge Grayson's smirk vanished. The homeless man, no, the lawyer, took a step forward, his sharp eyes never leaving the judge's face. "Now," he continued, "shall we proceed with this case? Or do you still think my appearance makes me less of a man?" The judge swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around his gavel. His face turned pale. He had just humiliated a man in open court, only to realize he had mocked one of his own. The courtroom held its breath. A few days earlier, Alexander Cole sat on a park bench, watching people pass by. His once sharp suit was now covered in dirt, his hands rough and bruised. He hadn't always been like this. Just a month ago, he was in his downtown office, reviewing cases, shaking hands with clients, and winning arguments in courtrooms. But then, his life collapsed. It all started when he took on the wrong case, one that exposed the dirty dealings of powerful men. He was threatened, followed, and eventually framed. His accounts were frozen, his apartment raided, and his law firm abandoned him. Within weeks, he lost everything. Now, he was sleeping under bridges, surviving on scraps. But he wasn't broken. He knew exactly who had done this to him, and he had a plan. That morning, he stood outside the courthouse, watching people in suits walk past him without a second glance. They didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. He had once walked alongside them, argued cases against them. Now, he was invisible. Or so they thought. A commotion near the courthouse entrance caught his attention. A woman was crying, clutching her young son. A police officer was speaking to her with little patience. "Ma'am, I already told you," the officer sighed. "You missed your court hearing. The judge issued a warrant for your arrest." "I was sick," the woman pleaded. "I didn't even know." "Please, my son." The officer shook his head. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to come with me." Alexander took a step forward. "Excuse me," he said. The officer turned, frowning. "Move along, sir." But Alexander wasn't leaving. "What's the charge?" The officer narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" Alexander smirked. "Someone who knows the law." He turned to the woman. "Did you receive an official notice of your court date?" She sniffled and shook her head. "No, I never got anything." Alexander nodded. "Then the warrant is invalid. If she wasn't properly notified, she cannot be arrested for missing court. She has the right to a new hearing." The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner. "Listen, man, I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "No game," Alexander interrupted. "Just the law." A few people had stopped to watch. The officer shifted uncomfortably. Finally, he sighed and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, cancel that warrant," he muttered. The woman sobbed with relief, hugging her son. "Thank you," she whispered. Alexander simply nodded and walked away. But as he stepped inside the courthouse, he had no idea that his next case would be his own. He had come to the courthouse for one reason, to file an appeal for his own case. But the moment he stepped inside, 2 security guards blocked his way. "Sir, you can't be in here like that," one of them said, eyeing his ragged clothes. "I have legal business," Alexander replied calmly. The guard chuckled. "Yeah? What? Did someone steal your shopping cart?" The other guard laughed. "Come on, man, let's not waste time." Alexander clenched his fists but kept his cool. "I have the right to enter this courthouse." "Not looking like that," You don't, the guard sneered. Now get out before we throw you out. Alexander sighed. Fine. You win. He turned around, but instead of leaving, he walked toward a crowded hallway where people were lining up for court hearings. He spotted an open door and stepped inside. And that was how he ended up in front of Judge Theodore Grayson. Mr. Cole, Judge Grayson muttered, still staring at the ID in Alexander's hand. The room was dead silent. Alexander crossed his arms. Are you going to mock me again, Your Honor? The judge cleared his throat, but he couldn't hide the embarrassment on his face. He had just ridiculed a man he had once respected, a man who had once been on his level. Alexander wasn't done. Your Honor, he continued, you just proved what's wrong with this system. You judged me based on my appearance before even knowing who I was. The judge opened his mouth, but Alexander cut him off. But let me make something very clear, he said. I may have lost everything, but I did not lose my knowledge of the law. And I will use that knowledge to expose every single person who tried to destroy me. The air in the room was thick with tension. No one dared to speak. Then, suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. A man in a dark suit stormed inside, his face red with anger. Alexander Cole, he barked. Alexander turned slowly. He recognized that voice. It was the man who had framed him. And now, everything was about to change. The tension in the courtroom became suffocating. The man who had stormed in was none other than Richard Langston, the powerful attorney who had orchestrated Alexander Cole's downfall. He was a senior partner at one of the biggest law firms in the city, a man who played dirty, and he had just barged into the courtroom, his face twisted in rage. Judge Grayson sat up straight. Mr. Langston, what is the meaning of this? But Langston ignored the judge. His eyes were locked on Alexander. I don't know what game you're playing, Cole, he sneered, stepping forward. But whatever stunt this is, it ends now. Alexander smirked. A stunt? Is that what you call fighting for justice? Langston scoffed. Justice? You were disbarred. You have no right to be standing in this courtroom, let alone pretending to still be a lawyer. Alexander's grip on his ID tightened. I was framed. Langston's face darkened. And yet, here you are, in rags, looking like a stray dog. No one believes your sob story, Cole. No one cares. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Mr. Langston, we do not tolerate outbursts in this court. But Langston turned to the judge, his voice lowering. Your Honor, this man is not a lawyer anymore. He is a fraud. He has no business being here. Alexander lifted his chin. Is that so? Langston smiled coldly. Yes, and I'll make sure security drags you out. Alexander chuckled. That's funny, considering I have legal documentation proving I was never officially disbarred. Langston flinched. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Alexander took a step forward. The reason I lost everything was because someone tampered with my records. My assets were frozen under false pretenses. My reputation was destroyed overnight. And guess what? I have the evidence. The courtroom murmured. Langston's eyes darted around. That's nonsense. Alexander pulled a folded document from his coat and tossed it onto the judge's desk. This is a court order proving that my suspension was never finalized. The board never voted. It was all a lie. Judge Grayson picked up the document, adjusting his glasses. His expression shifted from doubt to shock. He looked up at Langston, his face turning red. Mr. Langston, the judge said slowly, is this true? Langston hesitated. For the first time, he looked afraid. Alexander wasn't done. I know what you did, Langston, he said, his voice low but firm. You thought you buried me. You thought you could get rid of me. But I'm still here. Langston's hands curled into fists. You have no proof, he growled. Alexander smiled. Don't I? The doors swung open again. A woman in a black blazer walked in, holding a briefcase. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached Alexander and placed the case in front of him. Langston's face drained of color. No, he whispered. The woman opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of documents, flash drives, and signed affidavits. Say hello to my new legal team, Alexander said, smirking. We've been busy. Langston took a step back. This is a setup. "Oh no," Alexander replied. "This is justice." The judge stared at the evidence, then at Langston. His face hardened. "Bailiff," he ordered, "escort Mr. Langston into custody. I want this evidence reviewed immediately." Langston's eyes widened. "Wait. No, this isn't." The bailiff grabbed him by the arm. Langston struggled, but the courtroom was already whispering. The once powerful attorney was being dragged away in front of everyone. Alexander watched him go, feeling the weight of months of suffering lift from his shoulders. But he knew this wasn't over. Langston might be in trouble, but the people who had helped him, the ones in higher places, they were still out there. And Alexander wasn't stopping until every single one of them paid. But just as he was about to turn and leave, the judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole." Alexander looked up. "You've exposed something big today," Judge Grayson admitted. "But you're not out of the woods yet." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The judge's face was grim. "Because there's already another warrant out for your arrest." The room went silent. Alexander's stomach twisted. Then, before he could react, the courtroom doors burst open again. Armed officers rushed inside. "Alexander Cole," one of them barked, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice and unlawful practice of law." Gasps filled the room. Alexander stood frozen. Just when he thought he had one, they were taking him down again. Alexander barely had a moment to react before rough hands grabbed his arms and twisted them behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs clamped down on his wrists, sending a jolt of anger through him. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Spectators whispered furiously, reporters scrambled to write notes, and even Judge Grayson looked momentarily stunned. "Wait a minute," the judge barked. "What is the meaning of this?" The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, turned toward him and flashed a badge. "Detective Carl Vance, Your Honor. We have a warrant for Mr. Cole's arrest." Judge Grayson frowned. "On what grounds?" Vance's expression was unreadable. "Multiple counts of obstruction of justice and unlawful practice of law." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. I haven't broken any laws." The detective gave him a cold look. "You entered this courtroom today pretending to be an attorney when your license is under investigation. That's a felony." Alexander's mind raced. This is a setup. Someone powerful had just pulled strings behind the scenes. They had waited until the perfect moment, when he was about to expose everything, before throwing him in cuffs. Langston was gone, but his allies weren't. Judge Grayson looked down at the evidence-filled briefcase still sitting on his desk, then back at Alexander. There was hesitation in his eyes, but also something else, guilt. For the first time, Alexander saw it. The judge knew. He might not have been the mastermind behind Alexander's downfall, but he had looked the other way. He had played his part. Alexander narrowed his eyes. "Judge," he said, his voice low but firm, "you know this is wrong." The judge exhaled sharply but said nothing. "Your Honor," Vance said impatiently, "we need to take him in now." Judge Grayson hesitated. Then, finally, he nodded. "Proceed." The decision felt like a betrayal. The officers yanked Alexander forward, dragging him past stunned onlookers. Some people whispered in disbelief. Others looked satisfied, as if seeing a fallen man humbled even further. But Alexander wasn't done. As they led him toward the exit, he turned his head and locked eyes with the woman who had brought in the briefcase, his legal ally. She gave the slightest nod. He understood immediately. They weren't giving up. The fight wasn't over. But first, he had to survive what was coming next. The ride to the police station was silent. Detective Vance sat across from him in the back of the police van, arms crossed. His sharp eyes studied Alexander carefully. "You've made a lot of enemies," Vance finally said. Alexander didn't respond. Vance sighed. "Look, I know who you are. I know what happened to you. But here's the thing. You messed with powerful people, and they don't like when nobodies rise from the ashes." Alexander let out a small chuckle. "Is that what I am? A nobody?" Vance smirked. "You tell me. You had a law office, wealth, respect. Now you're sitting in the back of a police van in handcuffs. Doesn't exactly scream winner." Alexander stared at him. "I'm not done yet." Vance's smirk faded. You still don't get it, he muttered. This isn't about you winning or losing. This is about you staying alive long enough to see another day. Something about the way he said it made Alexander pause. What do you mean? Vance shook his head. Doesn't matter. Just be careful, Cole. People like you end up disappearing. The van slowed. The doors opened. Two uniformed officers grabbed Alexander and pulled him out into the dimly lit underground parking garage of the police station. As they dragged him toward the booking area, Alexander's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Then he saw them. Two men in black suits. Not cops. Not lawyers. Something worse. They stood near the entrance, waiting. And when their cold, calculating eyes met his, Alexander knew. He wasn't being taken to a normal jail cell. He was walking into a trap. Alexander's pulse pounded as he was led toward the two men in black suits. Everything about them screamed danger. They weren't ordinary officers. They weren't lawyers. These were the kind of men who made people disappear. The taller one, a man with slicked back hair and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "We'll take it from here," he said, his voice smooth but cold. The officers who had been escorting Alexander hesitated. Even they seemed uneasy. Detective Vance, who had followed them out of the van, frowned. "Wait a minute. Who authorized this transfer?" Scarface smiled. "Orders from above." Vance crossed his arms. "Above who?" Scarface's smile widened, but his eyes remained dead. "You don't want to ask too many questions, Detective. Just let us do our job." Vance's jaw tightened. Alexander stayed silent, analyzing the situation. He could feel the shift in energy. These men weren't just here to intimidate him. They were here to remove him. The other man, stockier with a shaved head, pulled out a set of forged documents. "Prisoner transfer," he said, waving them at the officers. Alexander's blood ran cold. This wasn't an arrest. This was an abduction. The officers looked at each other uncertainly. One of them turned to Vance. "Sir?" Vance hesitated, then took a step forward. "I don't know who you guys think you are, but no one is taking my prisoner unless I get confirmation from my superior." Scarface's expression darkened. "That's not how this works." Vance didn't budge. Alexander saw the tension spike. A silent battle was playing out, one of power and control. Vance wasn't part of their plan. He was an inconvenience. Scarface's fingers twitched near his waist. "He's armed." Alexander knew what was about to happen. In a split second, he made his move. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward, slamming into Scarface with his shoulder. The sudden impact knocked the man off balance. Chaos erupted. Vance shouted. The stocky man reached for his gun. Officers scrambled. Alexander twisted his body, throwing himself toward the nearest officer. "Get these cuffs off me now," he yelled. For a second, the officer hesitated. Then, realizing what was happening, he fumbled for the key. Scarface recovered fast. He grabbed Alexander's collar and yanked him back. "You little..." Bang! A gunshot echoed through the garage. Everyone froze. Scarface staggered, his body stiffening. His eyes widened in shock. He reached for his side. Blood was already blooming through his suit. Detective Vance stood behind him, gun drawn. Smoke curled from the barrel. Scarface collapsed to his knees, clutching his wound. Stocky panicked. He reached for his weapon, but before he could aim, crack! Vance swung his pistol like a hammer, smashing it against Stocky's head. The man crumpled, unconscious. Silence. Alexander, still in cuffs, stared at Vance. The detective holstered his weapon. "Guess I just committed career suicide," he muttered. The officers stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Vance turned to one of them. "Unlock him. Now." The officer snapped out of it and quickly unlocked Alexander's cuffs. Alexander flexed his wrists, barely believing what had just happened. He turned to Vance. "You didn't have to do that." Vance sighed. "Yeah, well, I hate when people think they can get away with this kind of crap." He glanced at Scarface, who was groaning on the ground. "You were right. This whole thing is bigger than you. Someone really wants you gone." Alexander took a shaky breath. His hands were finally free. He could fight back, but he had no time to celebrate. Sirens blared from outside. Reinforcements were coming. and he had one chance to escape. Vance seemed to read his mind. He grabbed Alexander's arm. If you want to stay alive, run. Alexander didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted into the night. Alexander's feet pounded against the pavement as he tore through the darkened streets. Cold air burned his lungs, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Behind him, the sirens grew louder. The police would soon arrive at the underground garage, and when they found two injured men in suits, one bleeding, the other unconscious, questions would be asked. And when they realized he was missing, the real hunt would begin. His mind raced. Think, Alex, where do you go? He had no phone, no money, no home. He was still wearing the same tattered clothes that had made the judge and prosecutor laugh at him just hours ago. He was an escaped fugitive now, and yet, for the first time in months, he felt alive. After running for what felt like hours, Alexander finally slowed near an abandoned alley. His muscles ached, and his throat was raw from breathing the cold air. He pressed his back against a wall and listened. Silence. For now, he was safe. He forced himself to think logically. He needed help, and there were only a few people he could trust. His legal ally, the woman with the briefcase. She had nodded at him in the courtroom. She knew something. But how do I find her? Then, like a spark, he remembered. The law firm. Chambers and Ross. Before his downfall, she had worked there as a junior associate. He hadn't paid much attention to her back then, but now she was his only hope. If she had brought evidence to court, it meant she was working against the people who had framed him. And right now, she was the only person in this city who wanted him to win. The problem was getting there. He was too recognizable, and the city was crawling with cops. The second he stepped into a well-lit area, he'd be spotted. Then he saw it. A worn-out hoodie hanging from a dumpster. Disgusting? Yes. But right now, pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. He yanked it on, pulling the hood low over his face, and kept moving. The Chambers and Ross law firm was a towering glass building in the wealthiest part of town. Alexander watched from across the street, hidden in the shadows. The entrance was guarded. Cameras everywhere. If he tried to walk in, security would throw him out. Or worse, alert the people who wanted him dead. He needed a different way in. Then, a stroke of luck. A delivery truck pulled into the loading dock. The driver hopped out and began unloading boxes, leaving the back doors wide open. Alexander smirked. That's my way in. Moments later, he crouched behind stacks of files and office supplies as the truck drove into the building's underground garage. When it stopped, the driver hopped out, leaving the back open for the security check. Alexander moved fast. He slipped out and hid behind a parked SUV. No alarms. No shouts. Step 1. Complete. Now came the hard part, finding her. The law firm was massive, but Alexander still remembered its layout. He used to walk these halls with confidence. Now, he was sneaking through them like a criminal. He spotted a janitor's cart left unattended in the hallway. Acting fast, he grabbed a mop and began pushing it like he belonged there. People ignored janitors. They never made eye contact. Perfect cover. As he rode the service elevator up, he finally let himself breathe. He was getting close. When the elevator dinged open on the 16th floor, he stepped into familiar territory, the paralegal offices. He scanned the desks, searching for a sign of her. Then he saw it. A nameplate, Olivia Carter. His heartbeat quickened. He moved toward her office. He reached the door. Knocked once. No answer. He turned the handle, unlocked. Inside, the office was small but neatly arranged. Papers were stacked on the desk, and a laptop screen glowed faintly. He searched quickly, flipping through documents. Then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A manila folder with his name on it. He snatched it up and opened it. Inside were bank statements, legal memos, police reports, all about him. But there was one thing that stood out. A list of names. His hands tightened on the paper as he read. Richard Langston, already taken down. Judge Theodore Grayson, compromised but still powerful. Senator William Hawthorne, corrupt politician backing Langston. Victor Hale, CEO of a private security firm. And then, at the bottom, Detective Carl Vance. Alexander's stomach twisted. Vance? The same man who had saved him? What was going on? His mind raced, but before he could process it, the office door clicked. He spun around just as Olivia Carter stepped inside. The moment she saw him, she gasped. "Oh my God!" Alexander raised his hands. "It's me. Don't scream." Her eyes were wide, but she didn't back away. How did you get in here?" "Long story." He held up the folder. "You were looking into my case?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I've been trying to prove you were framed." His eyes searched hers. "Then why is Detective Vance on this list?" Her face paled. She took a shaky breath. "Because, Alex, he's not who you think he is." The words hit him like a brick. Vance had saved him, stood up for him, risked his career for him. And now Olivia was telling him it was all a lie? Before he could react, she grabbed his arm. "You have to get out of here. Now." His body tensed. "What do you mean?" She looked at the clock on the wall. "He's coming." Alexander's pulse spiked. "Who?" But before she could answer, the fire alarm blared. Red lights flashed as the building went into lockdown. Then, through the speakers, a chilling voice echoed. "Attention! Alexander Cole is in the building. He is armed and dangerous. All exits are sealed." Alexander's heart stopped. The hunt had just begun. The blaring fire alarm sent a wave of panic through the building. Red emergency lights flashed across the walls, and outside Olivia's office, employees scrambled in confusion. But Alexander knew better. This wasn't a fire drill. It was a trap. The announcement had sealed every exit, locking him inside the enemy's den. Olivia's face was pale. "Alex, we have to go. Now." Alexander snapped into action. "Where's the nearest way out?" She shook her head. "The main exits will be swarming with security. The stairwells will be guarded too." A voice crackled over the firm's security intercom. "All personnel, remain in your offices. Do not attempt to leave. Security will handle the situation." Alexander clenched his jaw. "They're closing in." Then Olivia grabbed his wrist. "There's one way." "What?" She pulled him toward her office window and pointed down. Alexander peered out, and his stomach dropped. A maintenance scaffold hung outside, just a few floors below. The kind workers used to clean the massive glass windows of the building. His pulse pounded. It was a death trap. "You're insane," he muttered. "You got a better idea?" Olivia shot back. Behind them, heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. They were out of time. Alexander yanked the window open. Wind howled into the office, sending papers flying. He turned back to Olivia. "You coming?" She swallowed hard, then nodded. Voices shouted outside the door. They had seconds. Alexander gritted his teeth, swung one leg over the ledge, and climbed out onto the narrow metal beam of the scaffold. The whole structure wobbled beneath his weight. Then Olivia followed, gripping the frame so tightly her knuckles turned white. Inside the office, the door burst open. "Freeze!" Gunmen, not police, but private security, stormed in, dressed in tactical gear. Their weapons aimed directly at the open window. For a second, everything froze. Then, bang! A bullet shattered the glass inches from Olivia's head. She screamed, nearly losing her grip. Alexander grabbed her wrist, pulling her steady. "Move! Move!" They scrambled down the scaffold, metal creaking beneath them. Another shot rang out, barely missing Alexander's shoulder. Then, the scaffold jolted. One of the support cables snapped. The entire platform lurched forward, tilting dangerously. Olivia let out a terrified gasp as her feet slipped. Alexander lunged, grabbing her just before she fell off the edge. "Hold on," he grunted, muscles straining as he pulled her back onto the unstable frame. Above them, the gunmen weren't giving up. They leaned out of the window, tracking their targets. Alexander's mind raced. They needed to go down, fast. Then he saw it. A window 2 floors below was open. "Away inside. Jump for it," he ordered. Olivia's eyes widened. "Are you crazy?" "Trust me." A fresh burst of gunfire rang out. Glass exploded around them. Alexander had no time for doubts. He leaped, hurling himself toward the open window. For a terrifying second, he hung in midair. Then crash. He landed inside, rolling onto a conference table. Olivia stared in shock. Now you. Alexander called. She hesitated. Then, taking a deep breath, she jumped. He caught her. They tumbled to the ground in a heap, both panting. Above them, the security team shouted in frustration. They had lost their targets. But Alexander knew this wasn't over. Not even close. They sprinted through the empty office, dodging desks and file cabinets. Olivia led the way. There's a back elevator that leads to the underground parking lot. If we can make it there, we can escape. Alexander nodded. Let's move. They reached the elevator doors just as a security alarm blared through the building. All floors in lockdown. Intruders are heading toward lower levels. Alexander cursed. They're tracking us. Olivia jammed the elevator button repeatedly. The doors slid open, just as 3 security guards rounded the corner. Go. Alexander shoved Olivia inside and spun around. The first guard lunged. Alexander caught his wrist, twisted it, and slammed him against the wall. The second raised a baton. Alexander ducked, then drove his fist into the man's stomach. The third tackled him. Both crashed to the floor, struggling. Alexander twisted, rolling the man onto his back, then slammed his elbow down hard. The guard groaned and stopped moving. Olivia grabbed his arm. Alex, come on. The elevator was about to close. He leaped inside just as the doors sealed shut. For a moment, there was only the sound of their heavy breathing. Then Olivia looked at him. We're alive. Alexander exhaled. For now. The elevator dinged, reaching the underground garage. The doors slid open, and standing right outside, waiting for them, was Detective Carl Vance, a gun in his hand, and a cold smile on his lips. Going somewhere, Cole? The underground garage was eerily silent, save for the distant hum of security alarms above. The dim fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting unsettling shadows across the parked cars. Detective Carl Vance stood in front of the elevator, gun aimed directly at Alexander's chest. His expression was unreadable. Olivia stiffened beside Alexander. You set us up, she whispered. Vance tilted his head slightly. Set you up? No. I saved you. His gaze locked onto Alexander. You were supposed to run. You were supposed to disappear. But instead, you stormed into chambers and Ross like a man with a death wish. Alexander's jaw clenched. You shot those men back at the station. Vance smirked. Of course. They weren't supposed to take you alive. Alexander's stomach twisted. He had trusted Vance. The detective had helped him escape, even defied orders to keep him safe. And yet, his name had been on Olivia's list. A liar. A traitor. But why? Vance sighed and took a step closer, keeping the gun steady. You don't get it, do you, Cole? I've been trying to help you. But you keep making it impossible. Alexander took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Help me? By hunting me down? Vance chuckled. No, by keeping you alive long enough to make a deal. Alexander's eyes narrowed. A deal? Vance nodded. The people after you aren't just some corrupt attorneys, Cole. You pissed off senators, CEOs, men who pull the strings of this entire city. His voice lowered. If you don't play this smart, they will bury you. Permanently. Alexander studied him carefully. And let me guess, you work for them? Vance's smirk faded. No, I work for myself. And right now, keeping you breathing benefits me. Olivia's voice was laced with anger. You're a dirty cop. Vance barely reacted. I'm a survivor. For a few seconds, no one moved. The tension in the garage was thick, suffocating. Then, the sound of squealing tires echoed from the entrance. Vance turned slightly. That tiny moment of distraction was all Alexander needed. He moved. With lightning speed, Alexander lunged forward, grabbing Vance's wrist and twisting the gun downward. A shot fired, the bullet ricocheting off the concrete floor. Vance cursed and shoved back, but Alexander was already on him. They crashed against a parked SUV, wrestling for control of the weapon. Olivia backed away, eyes darting toward the approaching headlights. A black SUV screeched into the garage, its tires smoking. The doors flew open. Armed men poured out. More hitmen. Vance snarled. You idiot. You brought them here. Alexander elbowed him in the ribs, finally ripping the gun from his hand. Without hesitation, he aimed and fired, not at Vance, but at the men charging toward them. Bang, bang, bang. The first attacker dropped, clutching his leg. The second dived for cover behind a car. Chaos erupted. Vance twisted away, pulling a hidden blade from his belt and slashing at Alexander's arm. Pain flared as the knife grazed his skin, but Alexander didn't let go of the gun. "Olivia, run!" he shouted. She sprinted toward the nearest parked car. "We need a way out." Vance lunged at Alexander again. This time, Alexander anticipated it. He sidestepped, grabbed Vance by the back of the head, and slammed him face first into the SUV's side mirror. The glass shattered. Vance stumbled back, dazed. Alexander didn't wait. He grabbed Olivia's hand and bolted toward an unmarked sedan. Behind them, gunfire exploded through the garage. Tak. Bullets shredded through parked cars, shattering windshields. Alexander and Olivia dove behind the sedan just as another round of shots ricocheted off the concrete floor. Olivia fumbled with the car handle. "It's locked." Alexander cursed. "Hotwire it." Her eyes widened. "I'm a lawyer, not a criminal." Alexander pulled Vance's gun and fired blindly over the hood. "Well, tonight you're both." She swore under her breath and crawled under the dashboard. Vance groaned, stumbling back to his feet, blood dripping from a cut above his eyebrow. He pulled out another gun. Alexander barely had time to react. Vance fired. The bullet whizzed past Alexander's head, so close he felt the heat. Then, Olivia screamed. Alexander turned. Her hands were covered in blood. "Olivia," she gasped, clutching her side. "I got hit." Rage boiled inside Alexander. His grip tightened on the gun. Vance had just crossed the line. Alexander stood up from cover, ignoring the bullets flying around him, and locked eyes with Vance. For the first time, the detective hesitated. Alexander raised his gun. Vance's jaw clenched. "Don't do it, Cole." Alexander didn't speak. He just pulled the trigger. Bang! Vance's body jerked back. For a second, he stood still, staring at Alexander with wide, shocked eyes. Then, he collapsed. The remaining hitmen saw what happened and panicked. Two of them jumped into the SUV, slamming the doors shut. The engine roared to life. Alexander turned, just as Olivia let out a strangled cry. "I got it." The sedan's engine roared to life. Alexander yanked the driver's side door open. "Get in." Olivia, clutching her wounded side, crawled into the passenger seat. Alexander slammed the gas. The sedan peeled out of the garage just as the hitman's SUV spun around to chase them. In the rearview mirror, Alexander saw Vance's motionless body on the ground. For months, Vance had been playing both sides. Now, he was out of the game for good. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Because whoever had sent those men was still out there. The sedan skidded onto the main road, tires screeching as Alexander pushed the accelerator to the floor. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and streetlights, but he didn't care about speed limits anymore. In the rearview mirror, the black SUV was gaining on them. Olivia groaned in pain beside him, pressing her blood-soaked hand against her wounded side. "How bad is it?" Alexander asked, gripping the wheel. "Bad," she gasped. I think the bullet's still inside." Alexander gritted his teeth. He needed to get her to safety, but first, they had to survive. A burst of gunfire shattered the back windshield. Alexander ducked instinctively. The SUV was right behind them, and the men inside weren't hesitating to shoot. Olivia screamed, shielding her head as glass rained down around them. Alexander swerved, dodging traffic. Horns blared. Cars veered off the road. "Think, Alex. Think." He spotted an overpass up ahead. A construction site sat just beyond it, complete with half-built ramps and scaffolding. A risky plan formed in his mind. "Hold on," he shouted. Olivia barely had time to protest before Alexander yanked the wheel hard to the left, sending the sedan barreling toward the construction site. The SUV followed, tires screeching as it tried to keep up. Alexander's eyes locked onto a metal ramp ahead, one that led to a second level of the unfinished site. He floored it. "Alex, what are you doing?" Olivia shrieked. The sedan hit the ramp at full speed, launched into the air. For a heart-stopping moment, they were weightless. Then crash. The sedan landed on the second level of the construction site, metal beams groaning under the impact. The SUV wasn't so lucky. Still on the ground, the driver tried to follow, but the ramp was too steep. The front of the SUV collided with a pile of steel rods, sending the entire vehicle flipping onto its roof. It landed with a violent crash, smoke billowing from the wreckage. Alexander barely breathed. Did that just work? Then, one of the hitmen crawled out of the overturned SUV, stumbling forward with a gun. Alexander didn't hesitate. He pulled Vance's gun from his belt. Bang! The bullet struck the man in the leg, sending him crashing back down. Silence. The fight was over. For now. Alexander didn't waste time. He spun toward Olivia. We need to get that bullet out. She was pale, sweat dripping down her forehead. Not here. Not now, she whispered. We need to disappear first. He nodded, gripping the wheel. She was right. The sirens in the distance told him that soon, the cops would be swarming the area, and Alexander Cole was still a wanted man. They drove through the city for nearly an hour, staying off major roads. Olivia grew weaker by the minute. She needed medical help. Fast. But a hospital was out of the question. Then, he remembered. There was one man who might help them. A doctor who didn't ask questions. 30 minutes later, Alexander pulled up behind a small, run-down clinic on the outskirts of town. The neon, open 24 hours, sign flickered, barely hanging on to life. Olivia groaned as Alexander lifted her out of the car, her blood staining his shirt. He carried her through the back entrance, kicking the door open. Inside, a grizzled-looking man in a white coat turned toward them. Dr. Felix Moreau, an underground physician who patched up criminals, fugitives, and anyone else willing to pay in cash. He took one look at them and sighed. Cole, what the hell did you bring to my door this time? Alexander laid Olivia onto an examination table. She's been shot. Bullets still inside. Moreau grumbled but grabbed his surgical gloves. Fine, but this is gonna cost you. Alexander pulled a stack of cash from his pocket, leftovers from a case he had hidden before his downfall. Moreau smirked. That'll do. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The next hour was brutal. Alexander watched as Moreau removed the bullet, his crude tools clinking in a metal tray. Olivia barely made a sound. She was tough. Finally, Moreau stepped back. She's lucky. Bullet missed any major organs. He wiped his hands on a towel. She'll need rest, though. Alexander exhaled. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived, because now, he had time to think, and what he had just learned terrified him. He sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the list of names he had stolen from Olivia's office. His enemies weren't just powerful. They owned the system. And now, Vance was dead, which meant someone else would come next. He turned to Olivia, who was half-conscious but watching him. We need to go after them, she whispered. Alexander nodded. He had spent months running, hiding, surviving. But now, it was time to fight back. The dim glow of a single overhead bulb flickered in the back room of Dr. Moreau's clinic. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, alcohol, and antiseptic. Olivia lay on a thin, lumpy mattress, her wound freshly stitched, her breathing slow but steady. Alexander sat beside her, gripping the list of names he had stolen from her office. His eyes scanned the paper, memorizing each one. Langston was gone. Vance was dead. But the real monsters, the ones who had orchestrated his downfall, were still out there. And now, they knew he was alive. You look like a man about to do something stupid, Moreau muttered from the doorway, arms crossed. Alexander smirked, though there was no humor in it. Wouldn't be the first time. The doctor snorted. Well, whatever you're planning, do it fast. Word's out that you survived the courthouse stunt. And let's just say your face ain't exactly welcome around here. Alexander stiffened. You mean? Moreau tossed a burner phone onto the table. Someone's been making calls, putting a price on your head. A bounty. Alexander clenched his fists. How much? Moreau lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly. High enough that even your old friends might consider turning you in. Olivia stirred beside him. Her eyelids fluttered open, her voice weak but steady. Then we don't have time to waste. Alexander met her gaze. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't giving up. Neither was he. An hour later, Alexander sat on the rooftop of a nearby building, staring out over the city. The burner phone Morrow had given him sat in his hands. He had one shot at this. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang. Once. Twice. Then, a voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. Alexander exhaled. Hello, Ethan. Ethan Pierce. His former best friend. His former law partner. The man who had watched as Alexander was destroyed and done nothing. I heard you've been busy, Ethan said smoothly. Kinda hard to miss. What with half the city looking for you. Alexander didn't waste time. I need information. A chuckle. Oh, now you need me? I don't have time for games, Ethan. A pause. Then Ethan's tone shifted. Yeah, I figured. Meet me in 1 hour. Same place as before. The line went dead. Alexander pocketed the phone and stood. This could be a trap, but he didn't have a choice. An hour later, Alexander stood in a shadowy alley behind an abandoned diner. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting strange shapes against the cracked pavement. Then, a figure stepped out from the darkness. Ethan Pierce. He looked almost the same as Alexander remembered. Sharp suit, perfectly combed hair, an air of arrogance about him. But his eyes were wary. You're still alive, Ethan said, stepping closer. Didn't expect that. Alexander kept his stance firm. You said you had information. Ethan smirked. Straight to business. That's what I always liked about you, Alex. He pulled out a manila envelope and handed it over. Everything I could dig up on Hawthorne and Victor Hale. Alexander took the envelope, flipping through the documents. Bank transfers. Hidden accounts. Shell companies. Evidence. He looked up. Why are you helping me? Ethan's smirk faded. He shoved his hands into his pockets, glancing around as if making sure they weren't being watched. I didn't help you before, he admitted. I was a coward. But you were right. About everything. His jaw tightened. Hawthorne and Hale, they don't just control the city. They control the law. The judges, the cops, the media. Alexander's grip on the papers tightened. He had known that already. But now he had proof. Ethan exhaled. You're in deep, Alex. They're not gonna let you expose them. Alexander nodded. Then I won't give them the chance. A sudden rustling in the alley made both men turn sharply. Alexander's instinct screamed danger. Then, bang, bang, gunshots. Alexander dived behind a dumpster, yanking Ethan down with him. A black van screeched to a halt at the alley entrance. Masked men poured out, guns blazing. Ethan swore. They followed me. Alexander grabbed his gun. Then we end this right now. The fight was on. Gunfire ripped through the alleyway, sending sparks flying as bullets struck metal dumpsters and shattered the neon lights overhead. Alexander pressed his back against the cold brick wall, gripping his gun tight. The masked men had fanned out, taking cover behind cars and trash bins. They weren't just street thugs. They moved like professionals. Hawthorne's people. Ethan was breathing hard beside him. You got a plan? Alexander's mind raced. 5 gunmen. Limited cover. 1 exit. Yeah, he had a plan. It was reckless as hell. He turned to Ethan. You still drive like you used to? Ethan raised an eyebrow. You seriously asking me that? Alexander smirked. Good. Get to that van. Ethan blinked. What? That van? The one they came in? Alexander checked his ammo. 1 clip. Not great. You wanted to make up for screwing me over, he muttered. Now's your chance. Ethan exhaled. Fine. Just don't let me die, okay? No promises. Then they moved. Alexander stepped out first, firing fast and hard. Bang, bang, bang. 1 masked gunman took a hit to the shoulder, stumbling back with a yell. Another ducked behind a crate, returning fire wildly. Ethan sprinted toward the van, weaving between bullets. A gunman spotted him. Stop him. Alexander swung his aim, putting a bullet in the man's leg. The guy crashed down, howling in pain. Ethan reached the driver's side door and yanked it open. But 1 last gunman was waiting, crouched behind the van. He lunged at Ethan. A knife flashed. Ethan barely dodged, but the blade sliced his arm. "Ethan!" Alexander shouted. Too late. The gunman slammed Ethan against the van, pinning him. Alexander charged forward. The gunman turned, raising the knife. Bang! A single shot. The attacker collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Alexander grabbed Ethan's arm. "Can you drive?" Ethan groaned but nodded. "Not well, but yeah. Good." Alexander shoved him toward the driver's seat. "Then let's get the hell out of here." The van screeched out of the alleyway, tires smoking. Behind them, the remaining gunmen were scrambling. One pulled out a radio. "They're getting away." Too late. The van roared into the city streets, vanishing into the night. Ethan drove like a madman, swerving between cars, ignoring red lights. Alexander clutched the dashboard. "We need to go somewhere safe." Ethan wiped sweat off his forehead. "Safe? Alex, I just killed a guy. There is no safe." "There is." Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. It had an address. Olivia had written it down before they left the clinic. A contact. Someone who could help them take the fight to Hawthorne and Hale. Ethan glanced at it. "Who lives there?" Alexander exhaled. "A ghost." 30 minutes later, they pulled up outside an old warehouse, deep in the industrial district. It looked abandoned. No lights. No signs of life. Ethan frowned. "You sure about this?" Alexander nodded. They stepped out, moving cautiously. The warehouse door was rusty, barely hanging on its hinges. Alexander knocked twice. Silence. Then, the door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, holding a shotgun. Sharp eyes. Scar along her cheek. She looked at Alexander. "Well, well," she said. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Alexander smirked. "Hello, Jade." Jade Kingston, a former FBI agent turned ghost. Once, she had been a rising star in federal investigations, until she made the mistake of going after Senator Hawthorne. Now, she was off the grid, living in the shadows, and she was their best shot at taking Hawthorne down. Jade lowered the shotgun. "Come in, before someone sees you." Inside, the warehouse was filled with files, computers, surveillance photos. Jade was still investigating Hawthorne. Alexander looked around. "You never stopped, did you?" She snorted. "Unlike you, I don't let the bad guys win." Ethan muttered. "I already hate her." Jade ignored him. She grabbed a folder and tossed it on the table. "You want to take down Hawthorne? Here's what I know." Alexander flipped it open, and his stomach dropped. Inside were photos of people he recognized. Judges, cops, businessmen, and at the center of it all, Victor Hale. Jade tapped the name. "Hale isn't just a CEO. He's a fixer. He makes problems disappear. If you want to expose Hawthorne, you need to go through him first." Alexander exhaled. He had suspected it, but now he had proof. Ethan frowned. "So, what? We take him out?" Jade smirked. "Not just take him out. Burn his entire operation to the ground." Alexander clenched his fists. For months, he had been hunted, framed, left for dead. Now, it was his turn. Victor Hale was about to lose everything. But before they could act, the warehouse lights flickered. Then boom, an explosion tore through the side of the building, knocking them all off their feet. Alexander hit the ground hard, ears ringing. Through the smoke, shadows moved. And then, gunfire. They had been found. The explosion had ripped through the side of the warehouse, sending metal and debris flying in every direction. Alexander's ears rang violently, the world around him shaking. He coughed, pushing himself up as dust clouded his vision. Then, gunfire. Tak. Bullets ripped through the warehouse walls, sending sparks flying. Jade was already on her feet, grabbing her shotgun. "We have to move. Now." Alexander turned toward Ethan. He was coughing, groggy, but alive. More gunmen were swarming into the warehouse, dressed in black tactical gear. These weren't just thugs. These were Hale's elite killers. Alexander pulled his gun. "We're trapped." Jade smirked. "Then we shoot our way out." Bang! She fired the first shot, blasting the nearest gunman off his feet. Then chaos erupted. Alexander moved fast. He dove behind a rusted metal shelf, returning fire as bullets whizzed past his head. Ethan grabbed a fallen pistol, shaking as he aimed. "I hate this," he shouted, squeezing the trigger. One of the gunmen took a hit to the chest and dropped. Jade reloaded. Less whining, more shooting. Alexander peeked out. More enemies were pouring in. There was no way they could hold them all off. Then, he saw it. A staircase leading to the upper level of the warehouse. "Up there," he shouted. Jade nodded. She fired one last blast, then sprinted toward the stairs. Alexander covered her, dragging Ethan along. They raced up to the second floor, bullets punching through the walls behind them. No cover, no escape, except a skylight. Jade smirked. "Hope you're not afraid of heights." Alexander didn't hesitate. He raised his gun, shot the glass, crash. The skylight shattered open. Jade jumped first, grabbing the edge of the roof and pulling herself up. Ethan went next, barely making it. "This is the worst night of my life." Alexander climbed last, just as more gunmen burst into the warehouse below. But the moment his feet hit the rooftop, helicopter blades. He looked up. A black chopper hovered above them, its searchlight blinding. Then, a voice boomed through a speaker. "Give it up, Cole. You've lost." Alexander's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Victor Hale. The puppet master had finally come out to play. Hale's face appeared on a screen inside the chopper's cockpit, his silver hair slicked back, his expression bored. "I have to say," Hale continued, "I expected you to die a long time ago, but you're persistent. Annoying, but persistent." Jade gritted her teeth. "He's enjoying this." Hale sighed. "Here's the deal, Cole. You come with me, alive, and I let your friends walk away." Alexander's grip tightened on his gun. "I don't trust you," he growled. Hale smirked. "Smart man." Then, he nodded at his men below. And suddenly, a sniper's laser landed on Olivia's chest. Alexander froze. Jade's eyes widened. "No." Hale chuckled. "I don't need you to trust me. I just need you to surrender." Alexander's heart pounded. He could fight back, but Olivia would die. He could run, but they'd all be hunted forever. Jade whispered, "Don't do it, Alex. This guy never keeps his word." But Alexander already knew. There was only one move left. He raised his hands. Hale grinned. "Smart choice." Minutes later, Alexander was on his knees, hands bound in steel cuffs, as Hale's men dragged him toward a waiting transport van. Ethan, Olivia, and Jade were still on the rooftop, being held at gunpoint. Hale stepped onto the roof himself, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete. He looked down at Alexander. "You had a good run," he said. "But this is where your story ends." Alexander smirked. Hale frowned. "Something funny?" Alexander leaned in, lowering his voice. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Then boom. An explosion erupted behind them. Jade had detonated a hidden charge. Smoke. Fire. Chaos. Hale's men stumbled, coughing. Alexander acted instantly. He twisted, headbutted the nearest guard, stole his gun. Bang. Bang. 2 men dropped. Jade tackled the sniper, saving Olivia. Ethan, for once, didn't freeze. He grabbed a pipe and smashed it into the face of another guard. Hale staggered back, his perfect suit now covered in dust and debris. He locked eyes with Alexander. Then, he turned and ran. Alexander snarled. "Not this time." He gave chase. Hale ran down a metal fire escape, jumping onto the next rooftop. Alexander followed, hot on his heels. Hale reached the edge of the rooftop. A helicopter was waiting. A rope ladder unfurled. Hale grabbed on, climbing. Alexander skidded to a stop, raising his gun. He had one shot. Bang. The bullet slammed into Hale's shoulder. The senator screamed, slipping. He grabbed the rope just in time, barely holding on. The helicopter rose higher. Alexander ran forward, trying to grab the ladder, but it was too late. Hale was getting away. Alexander watched as the helicopter vanished into the night. But this wasn't over. Not yet. He turned back. Jade, Olivia, and Ethan stood behind him, bruised but alive. Ethan panted. "We We live. Jade smirked. Don't sound so surprised. Alexander exhaled. He had lost Hale tonight. But next time? Next time, there would be no escape. Hale thought he had one. But Alexander wasn't running anymore. He was going to end this, once and for all. The night air was thick with the scent of smoke and gunpowder. The battle at the warehouse was over, but Alexander Cole's war was just beginning. Standing on the rooftop, he watched the helicopter disappear, carrying Victor Hale to safety, for now. Jade stepped beside him, arms crossed. We lost him. Alexander clenched his jaw. Not for long. Ethan groaned as he collapsed onto a nearby vent. I hate this. I hate all of this. He pointed at Alexander. And you. You're a magnet for psychopaths. Olivia gritted her teeth, pressing against her wounded side. But at least we know where to hit next. She pulled out the stolen documents, the evidence Ethan had risked his life for. She flipped to the last page, holding it up for them to see. An address. One of Hale's private estates, his safe house outside the city. Alexander's eyes darkened. That's where he's hiding. Jade smirked. So, what's the plan? Alexander exhaled. He had spent months running, hiding, fighting just to survive. Now, it was time to finish this. 24 hours later, the wind howled through the mountains, cutting through the dark like a blade. Hale's safe house sat on the edge of a secluded forest, a fortress of steel and glass surrounded by armed guards. It was designed to keep people out. Alexander and his team were going to walk right in. Jade checked her rifle. We're seriously doing this? Ethan rubbed his temples. Why did I agree to this? Olivia, still weak from her injury, nodded at Alexander. Let's end this. Alexander tightened the bulletproof vest around his chest. No more running. They moved. The break-in. The first guards never saw them coming. Jade took out the sniper on the rooftop with a single shot. Alexander and Ethan silently disabled the men at the side entrance. Olivia hacked the security panel, killing the alarms before they could sound. Then they were in. Moving like ghosts through the luxurious corridors, they searched for Hale. Jade whispered, "Security's too light." Alexander's gut twisted. It was too easy. Then, the doors locked behind them. Bzzzzzt. The lights shut off. A voice crackled over the intercom, deep, mocking. I was hoping you'd come, Cole. Alexander's stomach dropped. Victor Hale had been expecting them. The trap. Floodlights blinded them as steel shutters slammed down, sealing every exit. Then, gunfire. Guards emerged from hidden panels in the walls, automatic rifles blazing. Ethan dove for cover. We're gonna die. Alexander fired back, dropping 2 men in rapid succession. Jade flipped the table, creating cover. Olivia. Override the lockdown. Olivia scrambled to the nearest control panel, fingers flying across the keys. Hale's voice laughed through the speakers. You didn't really think I wouldn't be prepared for you, did you? Alexander gritted his teeth. We're getting out of here. Olivia cursed. The system is encrypted. I need more time. Alexander checked his ammo. 3 bullets left. Then boom. The wall exploded. A black armored vehicle smashed through, knocking over guards. Alexander turned just in time to see Detective Vance. Still alive. Still angry. Still ready to fight. Vance leaned out of the vehicle, shotgun in hand. Need a ride? Jade smirked. I like this guy. Alexander didn't hesitate. Move. The final showdown. They piled into the armored truck, bullets bouncing off its reinforced exterior. Vance gunned the engine, plowing through guards as they raced toward the mansion's main office. Hale's final stronghold. Vance growled. Hale's in there. He's got a backup chopper landing in 5 minutes. Alexander's blood boiled. No. Hale wasn't escaping this time. The truck slammed through the mansion doors, screeching to a halt in the marble-floored lobby. Alexander jumped out first, gun raised. At the center of the room, standing calmly with a glass of whiskey in hand, Victor Hale, surrounded by heavily armed men. Hale sighed. I really hoped you'd just die quietly, Cole. Alexander leveled his gun. I'm not dying today. Hale smirked. No, but your friends are. He snapped his fingers. Guards raised their weapons. Bang. Jade fired first, dropping 2 men. Bang bang. Alexander shot another. Ethan, miraculously, shot a third. Oh my God, I hit someone. Olivia rushed to the security panel, overriding Hale's escape codes. Then, it was just Alexander and Hale. Face to face. Hale tossed his empty whiskey glass. So, what now, Cole? Alexander cocked his gun. You tell me. Hale smiled. Then, he lunged. Alexander dodged, but Hale was fast. They crashed through a glass wall, rolling onto the helipad. The escape helicopter hovered above them. Hale grabbed a metal pipe, swinging at Alexander's head. Clang. Alexander stumbled back, dazed. Hale grinned. You're a fighter. I'll give you that. Alexander wiped blood from his mouth. Yeah, he muttered. Then he grabbed a fallen pistol and shot Hale in the leg. Hale screamed, collapsing. Alexander stepped closer, gun aimed. Hale coughed, grinning through the pain. Go ahead. Kill me. Alexander hesitated. Then, he lowered the gun. Hale laughed weakly. Still think you're a good man? Alexander smirked.
No.
Then he punched Hale so hard he knocked him unconscious. Jade ran up. Helicopter's down. Police are on their way. Alexander exhaled. It was over. 1 week later, the news exploded. Senator William Hawthorne resigns in disgrace. Corruptio Victor Hale arrested. Inside the scandal that shook the city, Alexander watched the broadcast from a diner, sipping his coffee. Jade leaned against the table. You did it. Alexander smiled. We did. Olivia, now recovering, raised her cup. To justice. Ethan grumbled. To never doing that again. They laughed. For the first time in months, Alexander Cole was free. And as he looked out at the city, he knew one thing for certain. No one would ever silence him again.